Perhaps it is fitting to note that, of course, we're in the 100th anniversary of World War I, which was the most decisive and tragic and destructive break of modern human history. And it does exemplify for me that systems do not run on their own. There is no such thing as equilibrium in economic markets. There is no such thing as balance of power in politics, because this idea of balance or equilibrium in an ever-changing world makes little sense. Our biggest interest has to be in change, in flux, and in the danger of complex systems when they are faced with this kind of change that is relentless and is at a scale that we've never experienced before, and poses challenges that we've never faced before. And that, to my mind, is why we need a new field of sustainable development, not only as an idea for the UN or as a goal, but as an intellectual approach to the world that is something new. And that's what I will try to explain briefly this evening, my preoccupations and thoughts about that. Of course, you're looking at a visualization of our global scale network. This is a map of transport links. In fact, the white lines or the bright lines on the map are the air links. The blue lines are the shipping links in the world, and the green on these maps is a visualization, GIS-based visualization of the road networks of the world. We are, of course, a tightly linked, fully integrated global system of unprecedented density of connections. We are more interconnected and, by consequence of that, living in a kind of network of interaction that we have never experienced before. It has tremendous potential for good for the humanity that is part of this network. It also poses problems that threaten us in unprecedented ways. The idea of networks or complex systems lies at the very heart of how we have to understand the world, and we're living in an age where, because of big data and new ways of analysis, network ideas and the formalization of complex systems is operating at every scale. We have the networks of the brain in what's now called the connectome, being studied at this university, where Columbia is perhaps the world's leader in the study of mind and brain. And you have on the left one of the recent visualizations of the brain connectome. We have studies at the cellular level of the metabolic networks. And here you see the metabolites in green, and if you look closely, there are red dots, which are the enzymes as part of the process, and then you have the edges of that graph as the metabolic pathways. Human systems are the same, and human physical Earth systems are also complex, dynamic systems. The challenge of sustainable development is to understand the interactions of several complex subsystems. We do not study these processes effectively. Our disciplines are generally focused on, at most, one of these subsystems at a time, or even narrow parts of them, rather than the interconnections of these subsystems. And the essence of sustainable development as an analytical field is to understand the interconnections of several complex subsystems. At the First, at the circle on the top, but I don't mean it to be on the top by any means. I would call it the techno-economic system. Mind you, this already is different from studying an economic system, which is a complex system. Economists have not been very good at connecting technology and economics in a deep way, but our economic systems are complex technological systems. And that also defines, and we understand, almost nobody understands more than a small amount of the technology which defines our age and which makes us possible to function day to day. But that techno-economic system is just one part of the complexity we face. Of course, the purpose of the Earth Institute is to connect that techno-economic system with the rest of our social and physical realities in a meaningful way. Earth systems shown here are the physical, geophysical and biophysical dynamics of the Earth, studied at Lamont Doherty and at many other research institutes of the Earth Institute. These are enormously complex interactions. Everybody knows how complex the climate system is to understand, how complex it is as an interacting system, and therefore complex to forecast and to predict future developments. At the very minimum of sustainable development is the interaction of that techno-economic system and the Earth's physical systems. This will be one of the defining challenges of human survival and well-being in the future, and yet it remains in the economic sphere as a very small, almost tiny subset of economic studies. And for those who study Earth systems, the techno-economic side is almost often just off to the side. So the interconnections of these highly complex systems is not well elucidated. But I want to add two other critical dynamics. One is the geopolitical system, the system of international relations, the system of multinational and multilateral rulemaking, the dynamics of power, which is changing dramatically in the world in an unprecedentedly rapid way in our very time, and what I would call the social dynamics, a very complicated an inadequate title for complicated dynamics of human relations at various scales: the structure of the family, the structure of communities, human migration, changing values, culture, and what we feel to be societies under stress, not in their formal political systems necessarily, but in the human systems, the human interconnections, the collapse of trust in society, the inter-ethnic violence that is raging. And when we open the newspapers every day now, I noted today in the New York Times columns, you had Venezuela burning on the left, you had Ukraine burning in the center, and you had Syria burning on the right-hand column. And these are social dynamics as well as geopolitical, techno-economic, and earth dynamics. It is understanding these interconnected, complex, highly nonlinear, rapidly evolving systems that is at the core of the analysis that we need to make sense of the world that we're in, and yet how hard, obviously, it is to do that. Every one of these subsystems is itself enormously complex and looks like the same graph that we saw for the brain connectome or that we saw for the metabolite networking. This is simply a graph of cross-border banking relations. It has also the structure of a high degree of graph connectedness, which we experienced starting September 15, 2008, when that graph became the edges of financial panic that spread throughout the world in just a few weeks. without understanding the topology of that banking system graph, we cannot make sense of the financial risks that we face globally. So the structure is not all that different from a brain connectome, though you wonder where the brains are in this system sometimes. This is a different subsystem that we absolutely urgently need to understand. This is one graphical representation of our U.S. energy system. It shows the primary energy sources on the left and how they interact through the industrial processes to final end users of residential and commercial buildings, industrial use, transportation, and then the non-energy petrochemical and other industry use. Obviously enormously complex in the role that it plays in the economy, but this system needs to be managed. Managed not only to keep the lights on day to day, but managed so that within 25 years we are emitting perhaps only about 20% of the carbon dioxide that this system is now emitting. And that is an enormously complicated challenge.